Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Jude Isabella, founding editor of Hakai Magazine, and welcome to our online event, Salt, Sweat, and Grit, which is available on YouTube, where it will also be recorded. So let's get some housekeeping out of the way. I'll be chatting with our panel for about 30 minutes before taking questions from the audience. Now, for those joining on Zoom, if you have a question, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We have someone who are monitoring the questions, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. So now I'll just get into our event here. Now, this online event, Salt, Sweat, and Grit, was inspired by a feature we published a few weeks ago, Surviving the Race to Alaska by Alden Chuelos. Now, the Race to Alaska, also known as R2AK, is one of the most grueling at-sea races, taking participants from Port Townsend, Washington, to Ketchikan, Alaska, where they navigate some complicated currents, narrow rocky channels, and inclement weather. The premise is simple. Travel more than 1,200 kilometers with no motors, no support, and a $10,000 award waiting for the winner. And the second place gets a lovely set of steak knives. Racers prepare sailboats, kayaks, paddleboards, or any other non-motorized vessel for a chance to put their paddle to the metal in the ultimate marine race. But what drives people to take on such extreme adventures? Now, here to help answer that question are three panelists. Paula Reid, an adventure psychologist who has raced a yacht around the world, skied to the South Pole, and cycled across 13 countries, just finishing the 13th, France, last week, and she cycled over 600 miles. Karl Krüger, who's the first person to complete the Race to Alaska by paddleboard, which he accomplished in 14 days, beating several boats. Karl is also planning an unsupported paddle through the Northwest Passage in the Canadian Arctic this summer. And we have Doug Smith, who is on a boat right now. Actually, so is Karl. Doug entered the Race to Alaska for the first time this year, and he will be sailing solo under the name Team Dark Star. So in the words of Race to Alaska's founder, Jack Beatty, the coastline from Port Townsend to Victoria to the finish line is breathtaking and humbling and instructive. The goal of the race is to get people to have an unfiltered experience with who they could be. It's an endeavor based on the hardest kind of simplicity. So my first question is for all of you. Do these goals of personal betterment, humility, struggle, and simplicity, do they resonate? Or is it something else that compels you to take such a voyage? Karl, why don't you go first?
Yeah, straight under the bus. All of those things resonate, actually. When I signed up for the Race to Alaska on a paddleboard, the notion was to go on the simplest craft possible, and to turn up the requirements of me, not having a support group around, and just be me, myself, and I, and to have that experience in the least filtered way possible. All those comments by Jake definitely resonate for me.
Okay, great. And Paula, what's motivated you to yacht, ski, and cycle around the world?
It resonates with me too, actually. I'm pleased to hear them, because it's there's some quite subtle and quite complex motivations and emotions involved in these things, not as obvious as, death-defying risk or bravery, but I quite like those. So for me, it's all about living life to the full. I don't necessarily believe in life after death, but I do believe in life before death, and milking it for as much as we can get. So whether that's tough, challenging, easy, funny, outrageous, crazy, for me, it's really about living life to the full and making the most of it and kicking the ass out of it.
Awesome. Now, Doug, why did you sign up for the Race to Alaska this year? Oh, I think you need to unmute.
He's probably saying something really interesting.
No. Yeah, I know. Well, he is on a boat somewhere.
He's madly making preparations for next week. Is what
I
he's
know,
doing.
I know.
There, now I'm unmuted. How about that?
Okay, fantastic. Thanks. We
there,
figure
that's
you
better.
have a lot on your mind right now.
Of course I do, because I am, as usual, unprepared for what I've undertaken here and working hard to get ready. My wife, I live in Alaska, a little town of 800 people, and I've taught school for a long time. And my summers have been spent sailing Southeast Alaska and the northern BC coast for the last 35 years with my wife. And we just love, Talkeetna, the town I live in, is up by Denali National Park. It's not on salt water. We both love, the Northwest coast. So we'd sail every summer for 2 months. And, she died 2 years ago, quite unexpectedly. And and then COVID hit. And so I was kind of sitting in my cabin in the dark and cold in the winter going, oh my God, what am I doing with my life? And sadly, or perhaps wonderfully, the R2AK popped up on my screen somehow as I was wondering, how am I going to keep sailing, by myself? Can I sail by myself? And I've been a boat builder for a long time. So somehow needing something to do with my life and having this vision of, I'd love to keep sailing this coast. Why not do it, the stupidest way possible by myself, unsupported, passing by all these beautiful bays with creeks and bears, campfires, eating seafood every day instead, just sail right by them, eat glop instead of fish tacos, and see if I can do it. So it's a personal challenge, and it kind of pulled me out of a real funk. So the boat is now close to done. You can see it's sort of got, it's in a bit of a mess right now, but it's just been a vision that wouldn't let go of me. And even when the boat got done 2 months ago, I was like, really, am I going to follow through on this thing? And here I am, ready, almost ready to go.
Yeah, awesome. That's great. Paula, you study the psychology of adventure. What does a journey like this take? Not only physically, but mentally, emotionally?
So much. There's probably 300 things that it takes: emotions, motivation, mental strength. So the basics, I also believe in preparation before departure. So it does take some investment in the mind as well as the body and the kit beforehand. So it takes some mental prep and time dedicated to that as well before departure. But on the adventure, ideally an open exploratory mind. So whether you call it the growth mindset or being exploratory or open-minded, because you've got to be so agile to be able to kind of go with the flow. So an open mind, an open heart. Then you've got the resilience or mental toughness or grit. So the absolute determination and commitment to see it through, to ride the tough stuff. So that requires a definite mental toughness. Quite often to reposition or reframe when it gets really shitty. So being able to twist a disaster or a huge difficulty or big anxiety or depression into something that's an opportunity or something that rises your spirits a bit. Teamwork, obviously, not necessarily for Doug, but for other people who are having to work together. And then some sort of vision or end point that you can aim for. But then when it gets really tough, to really rein that back in and just do the step-by-step survival mode. So knowing when to, gun for the finishing line and get all excited about the visionary end, but also to have to just get through one determined step at a time when it gets really tough. So that flexibility and adaptability is crucial as well.
Right. Doug, so you're set to sail next week. You haven't quite finished your boat, it sounds like. But you must
I'm fine-tuning, I'm putting a little extra rigging on here and there. I'm putting up my radar reflector today, among other things. So, yeah.
Good plan.
Yeah.
So,
yes,
but aside from building your boat and, physically getting ready, how have you been preparing?
Lists on lists, basically. I think, the psychological part of this whole thing is going to be pretty interesting. It's a very long way. And like I say, I've sailed this coast. I kind of know what it can dish out, and I have absolutely no intention of attempting to win. It's a personal quest to try to finish for me. And so, yeah, preparation wise, I mean, I could go to, oh, well, I bought I'm going to be rowing instead of like cycling to when there's no wind. So, I bought a rowing machine at Costco. I don't know if that's much of a preparation, but it didn't work very well. So I took it back, I don't know, yeah, just trying, I did a lot of skiing and we were trying to stay fit enough to do this, but psychologically it's going to be, I think, an interesting battle for me, sticking with it through the middle. It's a long middle on this thing, and we'll see how that goes.
Now, Karl, in 2017, you became the first and only person to complete the race by stand-up paddleboard, and you were solo. So I have a two-part question here. One, do you have any advice for Doug, who's...
Yeah, please.
Well, he's cheating. He's got a boat.
You have a point.
Just kidding. Well, a lot that Paula said resonated with me. I've said many times to people, just like in life, right? There's good times and there's bad times, and you have to know while you're experiencing either of those two things that it's going to change. You have to know when things are really good and the sun's out and everything is just wonderful and rainbows that, probably won't be too long before it changes, and just be ready for that. Just know that it could change. And likewise, when you're there and it's just pouring down rain and you're pulling on that paddle and you're not making way and you're hungry, cold, wet, tired, and you just have to know and recognize that this too will pass, and you just keep going, and in those hardest moments, during that paddle, I would start toes up and work on my breath and turn it into the meditation exercise that it is. Just check in with my body and then my surroundings. I would look at those raindrops and think about the patterns on the surface of the water. I would focus on the wavelets and the patterns they made, and I would think about the different wave trains and different swell trains that I was experiencing, and just try to figure out how large and maybe how far away that weather system was that produced this swell train. And just I would dive into those things, and before you knew it, I'd look up and I'd come back to myself and realize that 20 miles just vaporized behind me. When I was close to shore, I'd cluck at the ravens and see if I could get them going, and it was a lot of that, just whatever it took to dive into what my surroundings were and get out of my own head and that quote unquote knife fight in a phone booth that can happen in there when you're having those hard times. Right. And what I realized is that I dearly love being alone. It's wonderful.
Yeah, that is helpful. I have to say, I just heard you say hungry, cold, wet, tired, like it was one word. So
it is.
I think I'm going to use that from now on. Hungry, cold, wet, tired.
Yeah.
At one point on your paddleboard in that race, when all the sailboats were hunkering down for a storm, you were setting off to catch the slack tide and strong winds. So, I've got to ask, how do you know if you're in over your head?
That's usually pretty obvious. The trick is to see it before it happens. And I spend a lot of time on the water, and on my paddleboard too. It's a happy place for me. I do a lot of downwind paddling and not so much racing. I've got a race actually this Friday night. It's a 70-mile race. They give you 48 hours to finish it, but most years I finish in about 14 to 16. But anyway, that night, when I got that weather report, there's a southeast gale in Johnstone Strait, and knowing Johnstone Strait and also knowing the kinds of conditions I've been out in on stand-up paddleboards for fun, so every time, there's a group of us here on Orcas Island, and all over the world, really. It's a sport kind of in and of itself, downwind stand-up paddling, where we wait for storm systems and go out in those heavy conditions on boards, and you can pick up a wave and surf it for miles. Wow. I've done quite a lot of that, as well as surfing and stuff. And so when I listened to the weather report and heard the wind velocity and looked at the timing of the currents and everything, it was like some kind of gift from heaven. It was perfect. What I was looking at was a 70-mile downwinder. And so I got right into it. I couldn't let that opportunity pass, because in Johnstone Strait, a lot of times you can get these real strong northwesterlies, and and I was really watching closely for that, because that would have been a horrible situation for me to get into, is a strong northwesterly and a stand-up paddleboard in there. So when I saw this forecast for a southeast gale, it was a gift, and so
Right.
I jumped on it.
So it's really experience, I guess. And for those who don't know where Orcas Island is, it's a San Juan Island, part of Washington State. It's not that far from Victoria, and the race stops in Victoria. And yeah, Johnstone Strait can be pretty gnarly for sure. I've been up there.
Sure can.
Here's another question for everybody. Now, the Race to Alaska is also about having fun and connecting with humans and nature along the route. Now, I'm sure you all have a favorite misadventure or story at sea. So, Paula, you must have a lot. I've looked at your website.
Misadventure is still obviously adventure. That's defined as almost adventure.
Good
You don't
point.
quite know what's around the corner. You don't know what's going to hit you next, and you ride the wave, as it were. So yeah, I've got hundreds, of course, but the sailing around the world, the yacht race I did, that was a 10-month long race, and it was all the way around the world, around Cape Horn. But I think some of the most beautiful aspects were like the Southern Lights and the Milky Way, and at night you've got the phosphorescence of the dolphins torpedoing past the boat. You've got the Southern Lights playing above your head with all the greens and purples and yellows. You've got the crew banter on deck, and the Milky Way. I mean, it's absolutely stunning. So not really a misadventure, but absolutely stunning sort of surroundings and environment to be in. And then there was one where we did, do you celebrate April Fools over there?
Yes.
So we did a spoof story about a submarine that came up and helped us. And we sort of photoshopped in a periscope and talked about how we had cups of tea and chat with the submarine crew. And everyone watching went up in arms, because they said, you're not allowed any help, you're not allowed outside assistance and so on. So that was quite funny on that day when we did our April Fool. But mostly the crew banter was where a lot of the humor came from, because you do need humor to lighten the mood and lift your spirits sometimes. Yeah.
How about you, Doug? You've sailed the Inside Passage for 35 years, so you must know a lot of sailors.
I know a lot of sailors, and my wife and I went hitchhiking around the world, so we've crossed some oceans and all this kind of thing. And I was thinking of the submarine spoof, and I know many years ago we were sailing down right here at the Strait of Juan de Fuca, and we just caught a Dungeness spit. There were 4 of us on the boat. We'd caught way too many crab to eat. I think at that time the limit was 6 per person, and we were young chaps that felt we could each eat 6. So 4 days later, with no refrigeration, the crab had gone bad. The skipper thought that by putting curry in the crab, we could eat it. So we did, and then went out, did a night sail to the west side of Vancouver Island with a horrible wind against the current. We were all really sick, and then we almost got run over. Suddenly we looked behind us in the dark, and there's the red and green lights of a bow 40 feet above us. And we thought we were going to be run down by a tanker, but it was a submarine that then submerged right next to us, a boat length next to us. And then we went around Cape Beale at night, which was another adventure. We almost went on the rocks, got around the point to a bar in Canada. We all hopped off the boat and got drunk. And then the police constable came and arrested us for not clearing customs first. So it was quite a night right here where we're starting out in 3 days, or a few days.
A submarine from where?
Oh, I don't know, probably the submarine base down here, where that is, Bremerton,
Yeah.
It just popped up and went right back down. And I don't know if you ever saw us or not. It's the middle of the night, so we were not doing well. But yeah, it was a good adventure.
How about you, Karl? I have to say that the story of your race on the paddleboard when the elderly woman came and brought you muffins kind of brought tears to my eyes. It was such a lovely thing.
It was amazing. Yeah, that was actually the year I did not make it to Ketchikan.
Okay.
I tried it in 2016 and blew up my board the first day, and then went back to the drawing board and had a custom one built, and went back and was able to complete it 2017. But in 2016, I was in the Gulf Islands, and I knew that the next day I was going to hit the stop button because my board was just full of water and it was not going well. And I was there in my tent, and I heard this just really faint outside the tent, Heart of Gold, which is my team name. And I peek out, and there's this little old lady with a bag of fresh scones and peach chutney. And she came into my tent, and we sat there, and I ate every single one of those scones. It was amazing. We had some really nice conversations. She was lovely.
Yeah, very sweet. Paula, you've talked about this a little bit earlier, but what advice do you have for optimizing endurance during a physical test like this? Like you talked about, mentally preparing too, but how do you keep on the treadmill? You know what I mean? Like the race is coming, but you've got to keep that physical, like Doug was talking about, keeping fit, skiing and all that kind of stuff. Like, cause you have to step it up a little bit, I think, from your usual routine if you have this goal in mind. So how do you keep doing that day after day, keeping fit?
Well, as you say, discipline and routine are huge importance. So the little habits, the discipline, the routine, the habits, they've really got to kick in, and you lean on them, and they create the structure for days. Whether it's 3 o'clock in the morning or going off watch or whatever it is, that absolute discipline, routine, and sticking to it, and having all those little, set pieces that you can play to, because otherwise it can all go to pot, and before you know it, you get lethargic or lazy or give up or whatever. So that holds everything together. That's the rigidity or the structure that holds you and your mission in place. Then, of course, there's, as I said before, there's fun and enjoyment and laughter. So trying to somehow facilitate some fun, even when things are tough. So like Karl was saying earlier, just absolutely practicing meditation or curiosity or wonder and awe at just the tiniest of droplets on your sail, or the absolute sunrise, or camaraderie, or a hot cup of tea, or I keep saying tea, sorry, I'm British, coffee, whatever. But, the lovely, happy moments, because scientifically, they reset us. So if we're feeling negative or down, it's the happier times, the awe, the gratitude, the wonder, the all that stuff that takes away the stresses and the chemicals and all that stuff that's built up from the negative stuff. So those two things. As I said before, looking forward to the kind of finale or the end point or the success or having a hot sauna afterwards, or whatever it is, but then also bring it back in and grinding those hours and miles and knots out. Mm-hmm. So one step at a time, and every inch and every mile and so on really matters. Any games or communication with the outside world can obviously break the day up a bit. And the third quarter is the hardest time. So, you're over halfway and you've had a little buzz of, success, but you're not quite in that last quarter. So the third quarter of any endurance event is quite often the toughest. So that's the one to look out for, and, get all those motivating things happening, whether that's games or goals or distractions or communications or whatever it is. And my last one is segmentation. So if you break down the whole, stretch of water into hours or knots or mileage or whatever, then that's segmentation, and you can gradually tick them off, so you can actually see progress and celebrate progress. And each time you've achieved, 10 nautical miles, a little dance on deck or something, and it's sort of it's a nice celebration to do as you achieve each chunk.
Right. So it's kind of keeping that reward in mind when you're doing this. Like, you can reward yourself with that sauna. You can reward yourself with a dance on deck. You can reward yourself with a
hot drink.
Tea. Yeah. Yeah. Doug, are you taking notes?
Yeah.
What's that?
Are you taking notes, Doug?
Oh, yeah, copious notes. Yes. Dancing on deck. That's my specialty.
So,
I
Doug,
get stuck in the harness sometimes, but you know.
Doug, what are the pros of sailing solo?
Well, I'm gonna find that out, because it's not something I have really done a lot of, and you know, I'm not sure I can think of a whole lot of them. You know, got to do everything for myself, and you know, so and you know, I've sailed with so many different people, and you know, it turns into quite a tight little club, and there's people watching your back, and you know, the watch, and bringing, you know, oh, while you're down there, bring me a cup of cocoa. So it's like, oh no, I've got to go make my own cocoa. So I think, you know, it's quite a personal challenge to me. I will be learning a lot, and I think for me, the destination, you know, the journey is the destination. I like what Karl's been talking about with the meditation and so on, because this coast is so astounding. There is always, yeah, if you can't meditate on rain, you aren't going to enjoy it. But yeah, the wildlife, the smells, the sounds, you know, every day is going to be, you know, just making the next point, and that'll be a success for me. I'm certainly not in it to win. It's a personal quest, and you know, when you first think of reefing, that's when you reef. And you know, I can put this boat up on a beach. You know, if the weather's bad, I'm going to sit and watch the people. I've already got steak knives, you know, so I'm going to take my time, be safe, and you know, try to just enjoy the immersion. But we'll see how it goes. It's a new experience for me, and so you know, yeah, I'm taking copious notes.
Okay, so very key here is being safe. And the Race to Alaska Review Committee says that they look for one quality in applicants above all the rest, and that's someone who's smart enough to know when to quit. And I know that's something that you've had to deal with, Karl, because you plan an over 3,000 kilometer paddle through the Northwest Passage, and I think you had to postpone the trip already once. So what happened there? Why did you have to postpone?
Yeah, that happened. And, you know, basically the same exact thing happened in R2AK. You know, I came to do it in 2016 and broke up my board and back to the drawing board, and came back and made it happen in 2017. And for this Northwest Passage paddle, you know, I mean, it's probably worthy of a whole seminar like this, just to talk about that decision to go from, you know, R2AK to what I view as the next logical step in my progression as a paddler and adventurer. But it's a massive step. You know, it's a monstrously huge project, and humbling in so many ways. And, you know, I got up there to Tuktoyaktuk, thinking that I was going to start paddling, and I came to this place where I realized that I, as a person, was nowhere near who I needed to be in order to be a success and come out the other end who I wanted to be there. I just simply hadn't done the homework yet. You know, physically, I was in great shape, but my life in general was a bit on the messy side. You know, I was heading into a divorce, and you know, there was a checklist. There's a whole laundry list of things that created a bit of undertow for me that mentally made it unreasonable for me to step into the water and you know, realistically think I'd be successful. And so in the last couple of years, you know, obviously the world got COVID, and you know, like Doug was saying, you know, I sat around here, you know, sitting on my thumbs. You know, I paddled still quite a lot, and you know, I live on the water. I live here on the boat. and kept after the training and just literally went down the checklist. Okay, I've got to deal with this. I've got to deal with this. And then eventually, as I got down through that checklist, what I noticed was starting to happen is just like for R2, like prior to the R2AK, I started having dreams. I would wake up, dreams about the race, scenarios. I'd wake up at 2 a.m. and my brain was working on scenarios. Okay, here you are at Cape Caution, and this is what's happening, and it would just throw me this curveball, and I'd work my way through those. That was my 2 o'clock in the morning work. And what I noticed, in getting ready for this Northwest Passage paddle is that once I got 2/3 of the way through that checklist of life stuff, things that I needed to handle in order to be ready for this, my brain started doing that. These scenarios started coming up, and just random thoughts would come to me during the day and would put me on my board in the Arctic. And it's been a part of my preparation process for sure.
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question well enough, but yeah.
No, it sounds like a fair amount of self-reflection, Paula, is kind of key to knowing if you're ready for an adventure.
The turning point for me was, just only just a handful of months ago, actually. Prior to going up to Tuktoyaktuk, I had set a date, and, in my mind, you always show up, right? Like I had said to myself, and that's that discipline that Paul is talking about. I had set a date, I'm going to start paddling, and I showed up. I went up there, and I realized when I got there that I wasn't ready. But even before leaving, and heading up there, when I would think about the paddle, I just had these overwhelming feelings of anxiety and just like, just too much. And single digit months ago, I rounded a corner where when I started thinking about the Northwest Passage, it was that wonder. It was like, God, I can't wait to see what happens when I round this peninsula. And I looked down towards the, it was a feeling of joy and freedom when I think about some of those places. I've been studying charts exhaustively and reading and just doing that sort of homework, but that anxiety is gone. And that was how I knew that it's time.
Oh, fantastic. So, we talked about mental preparation, physical preparation, that kind of thing. But I have to ask, because I don't think, Paula and I were surprised to find out that Karl was nearing 50. And, none of us are necessarily in prime physical shape, right? People get older.
Speak for yourself.
Okay, well, some of us get older.
Yeah.
Not
I won't tell you what birthday I've got coming up in 2 weeks.
But Paula, what I'd like to ask you is, at what point do we understand? Like, you have to understand that we're all of us are on a glass mountain at some point in our lives, especially if you're really active, right? Like, and you do these adventures. At some point, we'll physically be sliding down that mountain. But how do you know when you've reached that point and it's not something else that's going on, your mental or physical toughness, right? How do you know it's just like, well, that's an interesting line, because that's when you get hurt and injured, right? Really.
It's a difficult one to call, because I do think a lot of these events are 90% about the mental toughness, actually. And I know you're right, we can get more brittle, and our elasticity mentally and physically can get quite brittle when we get older. But actually, so much of it is about the mental agility and ability and capacity and dexterity. And that, of course, improves with age up to, quite a late age, let's say. So I'm 54, Karl's 50, Doug's, I don't know what next in the next 2 weeks. But
he's ageless.
69.
It does us good, we're looking pretty healthy, I think, for our age, and this sort of stuff does us good. So on balance, I'd much rather we kept pushing and enjoying the fresh air and the wonder of nature and mindfulness and physical fitness and movement for as long as possible. And if you look at, I always look at ancient, like, mountaineers, like Mesner, he was mountaineering into his 80s, and he was so fit and agile. He was amazing. So I think as long as we warm up and do our stretches mentally and physically, we can push on, and it's really good for us. And obviously our psychology affects our physical side, and it's a system, and our physical fitness affects our psychology. But generally it's super healthy for us, super good for us. Just going wild swimming or cold water swimming, for instance, look at that craze. So I don't see age as a limiting factor at all. Just be self-aware and have realistic optimism and feasible belief.
Okay, great. Thanks for that. I really appreciate it. One thing that we're going to move on to the questions shortly. I'm just going to ask Karl one question, because you're dealing with something that perhaps nobody else in the race is dealing with, and that's grief. So I'm so sorry for the loss of your wife. I read your bio on the Race to Alaska, and it was such a poignant obituary. Ellen Wolf passed away peacefully September 4th, 2019, surrounded by family and close friends. She would rather be sailing. That was lovely. So, you sailed the Inside Passage for 35 years. How has readying yourself for this adventure affected your grief?
Well, I think it's been really healthy. There's a lot of things. There's a lot, I got so many books on grief after Ellen died is ridiculous, but they're all, there's a lot of things that get you through grief. And I feel like I have popped out the other side. A lot of it was just living with the same person for 42 years. You kind of forget who you are as an individual, because you're reading each other's minds. So, but mostly it's, I have a good group of friends that were looking out for me. But then COVID hit and we couldn't see each other, except for outside, a lot of winter bocce ball playing. Building this boat, having a project that took a lot of, work was really positive. And then just less than a year ago, I've met another woman who made me this nice R2AK t-shirt. So, that's been a great thing. About the time I felt like, I'm back, Doug's back. I'm not half a person, I'm a whole person. And I think this trip is sort of, popping out the other side. Okay. I obviously planned it before I had someone else in my life, but I'm feeling like, okay, let's see what I can do as an individual, and let's see if I can still go sailing as an individual. And I built when I finished this boat, which wasn't long ago. I thought the smart thing would be spend the summer sailing up in Alaska, and then next year, work the kinks out, make sure I'm a good solo sailor, and then do the R2AK. But now we get to that age thing. I'm turning 69 in 2 weeks. It's like, God, am I going to make it to 70? I better do this while I can. I'm feeling good, so that helped. It was a good push. And it's, whether I get as far as Victoria or the Sydney Bakery, or who knows how far I will get, but it's been all part of a really good healing process. And I think Ellen's been with me through it, and she would completely disapprove of this race. She would say, I think I put this in my bio, it's like bicycling through the Louvre. The point of the Northwest Passage is to enjoy every bay, hike every creek, swim every lake, So, and instead we're just going to zip right on by, but it's going to be awesome. So I'm so excited to get started. I can't believe it.
Thanks for sharing that with us. Thank you. So we have some really great questions. And Karl, this is for you. I'm so curious about how you carried enough food and other gear on your paddleboard.
For the R2AK, I'm assuming for that one, because it's an unsupported race. That was actually one of the first big questions I needed to answer, is how I was going to deal with that. Because knowing the Inside Passage the way I do, I know that resupply is not, it's not really an option in a lot of places, and the food you might get isn't appropriate for that degree of athletic output. So what I did for that race, actually, one of my sponsors is Hammer Nutrition, who, they're up in Montana, and they produce fuels for endurance athletes, and have for about the last 30 years or so. And I made the commitment to fuel that way, just because the support, the very focused support athletically is there, without all the extra bulk and also the need to cook it. So I was using, so I did bring a stove for coffee, and my 1 cup of miso every night was, this like bit of joy that I had in my cold, wet, hungry tent. And a little bit of coffee in the morning was the same. So I did bring a stove and for that. But anyway, so I was on rocket fuel the whole way. I was using recovery shakes right after I got done paddling. They have a product called Perpetuum Solids, which are, they go down a lot like a malt ball kind of thing. It's, you chew it up, and 4 of those per hour were the calories that I needed to keep going. When you're expending that many calories, there's actually an upper limit to how many calories you can actually absorb. And, depending on your BMI, age, weight, all that sort of thing, there's an algorithm to figure out how many calories that is. And so at the time, it was 4 of those per hour for me while I was paddling. So as soon as I got up, I'd start eating them and eat them all day long. And then when I got done paddling, it was a recovery shake, a whey shake, and then my miso, and it was off to bed for me. And then I did stop a couple places and get burgers. I stopped in Campbell River and got a burger, and I stopped in Bella Bella and got a burger there too.
Nice.
So in that way, I was able to keep my kit really light, and not need to resupply, because the way I looked at the coast was, I really wanted to keep my options open. I didn't want to have a set route. I'm going to go this way, because like Paula's been saying, I wanted to stay flexible and just use what conditions were thrown my way to my best advantage. And so I didn't want to be stuck to a route. And so I carried everything I needed from day one.
And those burgers were acted like that reward system Paula was talking about too. If I make it there,
it was, yeah. They were wonderful to eat, but I deeply regretted the decision. Yeah. My stomach didn't like it. Yeah.
Right. So this is for all of you. If you could use one word, what word would you use to describe what you get from these extreme adventures? Paula, is there any word that pops into your head? To start with you.
For me, it's pride, but not in a big-headed way. So kind of the sense of achievement, really, but that's more than one word. So pride.
Okay, pride. Cool. Doug.
I'm just starting my big adventure. So I'd have to say, some balance of excitement and trepidation.
Okay.
Where I am.
And how about you, Karl?
Well, that's really hard to do. But I'd have to say that, like, in all the things that I've signed myself up for in life, I think the end goal has always been growth, and our 2AK was certainly that. I think that, like, for me anyway, one of the biggest measuring sticks is how much can you do with how little, and to step into this coast with not very much and throw yourself out there and pull it off like that. It was a huge exercise in growth for me, and it definitely didn't so much change me as just made me more who I was to begin with. It was just an expansion of my skill set and my confidence in taking on projects like this. So I'd have to say growth.
Cool. Now, Paula, one of the audience members would like to know, is there something psychologically that separates people who like to take such extreme adventures from people that are just content to go for a short camp or sail?
There's a bit of a debate about this one, and there's no hard and fast evidence. So there has been a debate. There are 5 traits that are deemed to be universal and considered to be fairly fixed within people, rather than changing all the time. And one of them is openness to experience, which for me just absolutely smacks of willingness to go on an adventure. So somebody's openness to experience, I think, obviously, if that was quite high, then one is more likely to be more comfortable going off and doing these crazy things. So that's one of them. But it's a bit nature nurture debate. There are certain character types or traits that would suggest some people are more exploratory than others. But then how do you define, adventure? It could literally just be making a cake if you've never made a cake before. So it's very personal. It's very subjective. And our comfort zone and stretch zone and so on, and what we deem to be risky or fearful is so different, calibrated with everyone uniquely. So that's my fudgy answer.
No, it's good. It makes sense. And I think you're right that, what is adventure to, one person is somebody else's non-adventure, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Personal choice. Karl, you've said stand-up paddleboards are the most efficient form of human-powered transportation. Why do you think that?
A few different reasons. I mean, I think that it takes miles for that for that opinion of mine to bear out. I think that over a wider range of conditions, that is true, and that was certainly borne out in the R2AK. I think in calm, say in calm conditions over the entire course, a kayak could win hands down, or an OC1 if someone could sit down that long or something. But there's so many compelling reasons. Like the fact, like we were talking earlier about Johnstone Strait and that southeast gale. I was averaging about 11 knots on that stand-up paddleboard because it's non-displacement and it can surf, right? Kayaks are much less efficient in those conditions. And then other conditions like Cape Caution, the next big hurdle in that race. I was out in conditions where the swells were double overhead. I'm 6 feet tall and they were that much taller than I was. And I was comfortable in those conditions because I was on a surfboard. If I fell off, all I had to do was get back on again. If you did a wet exit in a canoe or an OC1 or a kayak in those conditions, you might really have a problem. So I think that in a wider range of conditions, I can accelerate in side chop, for example, where in other types of paddlecraft can be a little dicey. So that opinion of mine is based upon a wide range of conditions over miles. If you just pit a stand-up paddleboard against a kayaker, of course the kayak would win.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. I'm glad to hear that answer. So it's time to wrap up. I want to thank you so much for joining us. And I guess I just want to leave this with, do you have anything that you'd like the audience to leave with? Any takeaways for them? Doug, anything?
I don't think so. I think compared to the other two interviewees, if I can do this, other people should feel like they can do it. You don't have to be of the, well, what do I know? I haven't started yet, but I'm feeling confident, and I'm excited, and anybody that has a dream of whatever sort, and maybe it is making a cake, just do it. That's all I'd have to say.
Good advice. How about you, Karl?
A lot of these conversations we've been having about age and all of that, it just makes me think, aren't we all just working with what we've got? I'm working with what I've got, and I really want to push myself to that next step of growth, and for the next person, it might be just riding their bicycle around the block. I'd like to leave people that notion of just what's your next challenge,
Right. Paula, how about you? Any takeaways the audience should have?
Yeah, if I could do one practical one and one a bit woo-woo. The practical one is, I've sailed around the world, I've skied to South Pole, I've cycled across 15 countries, but actually it's only skiing, it's only cycling, it's only sailing. You're just doing a lot of it. So don't be overwhelmed by the, enormity of the challenge. It's literally just, you know, sailing or paddling 1 hour at a time. It's when you put it all together, it seems really daunting. So that's my first practical tip. And then to go a bit high level, these things can actually transform us or, you know, create transcendence. So the fully present point that Karl made, it's such an incredible opportunity to do these things. And nature is an awesome thing, as we know. It's precious, but the environment is incredible. And just from one raindrop to a sunrise on the far horizon, to be fully present, to absolutely live and enjoy every single moment, whether it's tough or grim or beautiful or exciting, but to just absolutely be fully present for the whole thing and practice that meditation or curiosity or whatever it is to get you absolutely there in the moment, living life to the full during that whole trip.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for sharing those thoughts. That's a really great way to wrap this up. I really appreciate it. I feel inspired because I'm just learning how to sail and I can do it. So good luck on your race, Doug. And thank you both for joining us. Good luck with your trip, Karl, and your cycling trip, Paula. Have a good time with that too.
Thanks and good luck, Doug.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jude.
Hey, good luck, everyone.